Rebecca is based on a novel by Daphne du Maurier from 1939, I believe, maybe 38, about a young woman who she has no name. She's not given a name. She marries a young widower named Maxim de Winter and goes to live in his palatial estate called Manderley in England. She's basically bombarded by the memory, the artifacts, the images of the late Rebecca, Maxim's first wife. And she deals with kind of adjusting to life as a member of the landed gentry now, because she's a commoner. She comes to loggerheads basically with the head of the house staff who obsessed over Rebecca. Basically thought of her as her biggest confidant, maybe was even in love with her to an extent, Mrs. Danvers. And then there's a little bit of a mystery as to how Rebecca died, some kind of affairs with one of her cousins, and a whole bunch of other gothic romance mystery stuff that was originally made into a movie in 1940 by Alfred Hitchcock. It was his first major release in the West, and it's his only film to win Best Picture. So the moment this movie was announced, my red flags went flying because there's two things you just don't do. You don't remake Best Picture winners, see the 2006 version of All the King's Men, and you don't remake Hitchcock, as Gus Van Sant and Vince Vaughn learned with that terribly ill-advised shot-for-shot remake of Psycho. So when you're committing two cardinal sins in one movie, you're already behind the eight ball. And unfortunately for me, I love Armie Hammer as an actor. I love Lily James as an actress. She's one of my favorites. You know, her roles in Baby Driver, Yesterday. She's the only one that actually made the Cinderella remake by Disney tolerable. Like she has this ability to just light up any scene she's in. But they just give, unfortunately, just one-note performances that don't really go anywhere. And all of the teeth and suspense of the movie are just kind of ripped out in favor of just scenery. I'll grant it's very well-apportioned scenery. The production design crew did a fantastic job on this. In Hitchcock's original, Manderley is vast and open, but for the most part kind of empty. Like, she's basically in a cavern for the most part. He's focusing on her isolation and just how out of her own comfort zone she's in. And of course, her only confidant is Danvers, who's actively working against her. Whereas in this movie, we can still get that sense of isolation while she's tripping over everything in every room that used to be Rebecca's. Like, she literally can't escape it. She has to, tiptoe around it, figuratively and literally, just to avoid breaking everything and becoming even more paranoid. So that aspect of the film, I will applaud, certainly. But the rest of the stuff, I mean, you go from black and white to color, but you have a very drab, washed out color scheme, so it doesn't really add anything there. And while it may be unfair to make the comparison, but in the original, you had Laurence Olivier and Joan Fontaine. As much as I love Armie Hammer and Lily James, they do not come anywhere close to Laurence Olivier and Joan Fontaine. You might as well ask a dog to be a 747. It's just not going to happen.
One thing I realized I watched the remake, and then I went back and watched the original. And one of the things I really discovered is that I really don't like the Laurence Olivier character. Like, he's very unlikable to me in the 1940 original version. And in this version, I'm like, I don't really feel too much about him either way. Like, he's just a good-looking rich guy kind of thing. There's not a lot, it doesn't feel like there's a lot to him. Like, I don't feel like he's tortured. I don't feel like there is that, like, undercurrent of pain and suspense and darkness and all that stuff, which you do get with the Olivier version.
Both films open with Mrs. De Winter dreaming about Mandalay burning up. That both films open that way, and it's because they tell you in narration Mandalay's long gone at this point. In the original version, Joan Fontaine, as the future Mrs. De Winter, comes across Laurence Olivier standing on a ledge in Monaco, looking out over the water, looking like he might jump, looking like he's staring at something like that 1,000-yard stare. And initially, he's quite curt with her, like, because she surprised him by even being there. And then later on, he meets her in the same hotel and strikes up a conversation. They get to know each other. So already, just from Olivier's eyes in two scenes, you can tell that there's something much darker underneath the surface. You don't know if he's a tortured soul. You don't know if he's a villain. You don't know if he's violent. Whereas Armie Hammer, he meets Lily James through a meet cute in the hotel cafe, which just doesn't work on a lot of levels. And then for the rest of the courtship period, which is basically the first 20 minutes of the film in both versions, when they're in Monaco, he's just milquetoast. And there's nothing wrong with being milquetoast, but again, when you have this to compare with, like, if this were the only version of Rebecca, I'd probably rate it higher than I did. But because I know that what we have to work with throws it off in a way that I don't think can be redeemed. And it doesn't help when the director basically is like, oh, no, it's not a remake. It's another interpretation of the novel. You have the exact same opening shot. It's a remake.
The difference in the meeting is huge because it's a comedy meetup. You feel like these people are in a rom-com. It doesn't feel like there's no mystery to it.
Yeah, there's nothing potentially sinister about any of this, and there's no depth to it. It's just a surface level meet cute. Which again, for if this is a rom-com, fine. You know, that can be what it is.
I think one of the other things that lacks too is like with Lily James. I think she's just too pretty. Like Joan Fontaine was a beautiful woman, but she mastered the art of plenitude. You know, like
and Lily James is very much an ingenue. And to be fair, I have not read du Maurier's novel. I know there are some parts in the remake that hew closer to the page, like the specific circumstances about Rebecca's death. This version is much closer to the actual written page than the original film was. But I think again that falls under artistic license.
Hitchcock was limited too as to what he could show and what he could talk about in 1940.
Yeah, there's this lascivious cad who drops by and hits on Mrs. De Winter and playfully flirts with Danvers a couple of times, and it's just kind of left as him being a cad in the original film, whereas in the remake it's a bit more specific that he's actually Rebecca's cousin and there might have been something incestuous there. And yeah, 1940s audience, we really don't want to tread over that ground. Those are minor details that I don't think took away from the overall product of the Hitchcock version. Again, this new version is technically closer to the page in describing how Rebecca died. But the atmosphere, the implication of it is still there in Hitchcock's film. The weight of what happened is still equal in both films, even if one or two details is changed.
Would you recommend Rebecca, the new one?
Maybe as a comparative piece, just to kind of like see what can change from one version to the other. But again, I followed up. It's like two cardinal sins. Because I mean, my basic rule with remakes is you have to give me a compelling reason to watch them, because you're telling me to pay money either directly by going to the theater or indirectly through my streaming service. You're telling me to pay money to watch something I could already watch, that I've already seen. So there are circumstances where that works, like the Coen brothers doing True Grit. I was like, those guys have established themselves as true auteurs, so let me see what their take is on this material. That's compelling. But Netflix saying, here's another version of this film. Oh, by the way, it's one of Hitchcock's best. Oh, by the way, it won Best Picture. And oh, by the way, we have a sample size of why you shouldn't do this. If anything, this should have been a reason to go just completely bats. Just go balls to the wall, throw everything out there, see what sticks, and try to be controversial, try to be provocative. And it's just dull.
Maybe do like a modern adaptation of it or something, like bring it into the 21st century or some kind of something like that.
I mean, take a look at this year's at the 2020 version of The Invisible Man. That was ambitious potentially to a fault. It was like, it's one of the classic monster stories. It's one of the hardest stories to tell because, again, your villain is not seen by design. And to modernize that into gaslighting and abusive relationships, and Elizabeth Moss giving one of the best performances of her career, that is some extreme risk-taking, which even if it doesn't work, it's a compelling enough reason to say you've got my eyeballs for 2 hours. You got the money out of my pocket. It's like you've at least showed me that you're willing to try something different.
They make the argument that there's a reason why they made this story again.
And with this remake of Rebecca, I don't know what that reason is. There's nothing apparent as to what that reason is.